Welcome to this edition of the Click and Pledge's Fundraising Command Center podcast, where we talk the why, the what, and the how in the Click and Pledge's ecosystem.
Yep.
So that's the official welcome, but today our mission is a little simpler and honestly much deeper. We are launching into the Why series, and I am just so excited to introduce this as part one of our 5-part series, The Story with 1,000 Endings. We spent so much time on the transactional, how the buttons, the pages, the data, that we really felt we needed to step back and look at the fundamental architecture of connection.
Exactly. Our whole mission for this series is to redefine what effective fundraising even is. We suggest you shift away from seeing it as just a marketing task, a transactional exchange,
Right.
and instead embrace it as, well, almost a sacred invitation to a mythic journey. We really want to transform how you connect with your donors by giving them a real, powerful role in a much bigger story.
So the idea here is to give you a genuine framework,
Yeah.
a map, really, for structuring the donor's experience so that the simple act of giving becomes something epic. It elevates the donor from just being a customer to being a co-creator.
And to do that, we look to, the master mapmaker of narrative himself, Joseph Campbell. The foundation for this whole deep dive is his work. Specifically, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. We've adapted its patterns to create our 5-stage roadmap.
A roadmap for the donor's experience.
Exactly. We suggest you stop viewing the donor as a target audience to be converted and start seeing them as a potential hero, embarking on this journey of impact.
I love that framing, the mythic donor. It just gives so much more weight to the decision to engage. So before we jump into today's focus, let's just quickly outline those 5 stages so everyone knows the landscape we'll be covering.
Absolutely. So we've broken the hero's journey down into 5 key phases, and they're all framed around the donor's ultimate success. First, and this is our whole focus today, is the call to adventure.
Okay.
This is the sudden emotional shock. It's a short story, really flash fiction, that creates this essential gap of pain.
The disruption, the thing that breaks through the noise.
Right. Then second, you almost always encounter the refusal of the call. This is that immediate human reaction where the donor sort of tries to ignore the pain.
Which we all do.
We all do. And it's usually driven by overwhelming statistics or something we call psychic numbing. That's the next deep dive.
So if they refuse, how do we guide them?
Well, third is where you, the organization, step in. We call it supernatural aid. The nonprofit acts as the mentor.
Like Yoda.
Exactly like Yoda, providing the solution, the path forward for the donor to succeed.
And then the 4th step, the big commitment.
That's crossing the threshold. The ask itself is framed as the cliffhanger. It's the moment the donor leaves their ordinary world and enters the adventure.
And finally, the payoff, the thing that makes it all worthwhile.
The 5th stage, return with the elixir. The thank you here is not a receipt, it's the proof.
Proof of what?
The proof that the hero, the beneficiary in this case, was healed. It validates the donor's entire journey.
That is such a powerful framework.
Yeah.
It gives fundraisers a real narrative template instead of just, inventing a new sales pitch every week. But like you said, today we are drilling down exclusively on that first critical step, the call to adventure. It has to be that sudden emotional shock that just disrupts the donor's ordinary world.
Yeah. The challenge is immediacy. It has to be so sharp, so emotionally specific that it cuts through everything else instantly.
To really illustrate this, we suggest looking at what many people call the most powerful piece of flash fiction ever written. Its origins are a bit debated. Some say Hemingway, some don't. But what matters is its structure, its pure emotional impact. This is the perfect example of an effective call.
It really is. It's the model of painful, perfect brevity. Just 6 words.
I'm going to read it now. And I just want you, as you're listening, to let the feeling sink in, because this is the level of disruption we recommend you aim for. For sale. Baby shoes. Never worn. 6 words. Yeah, that's it. But when I hear that, I don't need a single other word to explain the tragedy. My mind it constructs the entire story.
Totally.
There was hope, there was anticipation, and then just this sudden catastrophic loss. It's completely devastating.
And the sadness we all feel from those 6 words teaches us the most critical lesson for issuing the call. Its power comes entirely from omission.
Omission. Okay, let's unpack that. Because it's so counterintuitive to how we're taught to write, emails or appeals.
Well, think about what that little story doesn't do. It doesn't describe the tragedy.
No.
It doesn't give you details about a hospital or a funeral or the parent's grief. It just describes the residue of the tragedy.
A residue.
Yeah. It hands you this artifact of the loss, the tiny, useless shoes, and your brain is compelled to fill in the massive event that left that artifact behind.
That is a crucial distinction. We're not showing the fire, we're showing the smoke.
Exactly. And that mechanism is what we suggest activates what we call the gap theory. This is the mechanic of caring that we recommend you leverage.
So the gap theory explains why the emotional work is done by the donor and not by the writer. Is that right?
Precisely. The story creates an emotional gap that you are, on a fundamental level, forced to fill. Since the most painful details are left out, you can't be a passive listener. You have to fill that void with your own empathy, your own imagination, and this is key, your own personal experiences of hope or loss.
Wow. So if I'm filling the gap, I'm not just reading about some abstract tragedy. I'm basically co-authoring it with my own emotional history. The loss becomes personal because I had to supply the grief myself.
Absolutely. And that personal investment is the shock required for the call to adventure. Your ordinary world has just been hit by something so real you can't ignore it.
Okay, but here's the challenge, right? This is where we see so many organizations fall down. It is hard to trust omission.
It's very hard.
How do we stop ourselves as the experts with all the data from just wanting to explain everything?
That is the most common mistake, over-explaining. We're trained to be transparent, to be comprehensive, but in that initial call, it just works against you.
It's like the opposite of the 6-word story.
It's the exact opposite. The mistake we observe is that organizations close the gap instantly. Instead of that powerful omission, they produce something dry, like, we help infants with mortality issues between birth and 6 months, focusing on postnatal complications.
Ugh, yeah. That's the tragedy reduced to a clinical description. It's clear, but it's completely boring.
And it's boring because it closes the gap. It prevents the donor from doing any emotional work. Your brain just hears that and goes, oh, okay. A problem defined by metrics.
Got it. File it away.
You file it away as a fact. It turns a deeply personal tragedy into a sterile, easily ignored data point.
I have definitely been guilty of that. You get so excited about the mission statement, you just dump 5 paragraphs of facts on someone. You think you're informing them, but what you're really doing is disconnecting them.
The initial call has to be sudden. It has to be real. It needs to be specific enough to be evocative, but incomplete enough to demand that emotional participation.
So we recommend that you, the fundraiser, embrace flash fiction techniques. You have to throw out the clinical overview and start your story right in the middle of the action. What's that called? In media res.
Starting in media res, yeah. It's key because it bypasses all the background data and lands the donor right in the emotional consequence.
You don't start with the budget. You start with the residue.
Exactly. You start with the consequence of the problem being unsolved.
Okay, let's make this really practical. Let's use an example. Say your organization deals with childhood displacement, chronic instability. Instead of explaining that the average family moves 4 times a year, you start with the artifact, the residue. You start with, the box is still under the bed.
That works. It works because it instantly implies this deep, unresolved backstory. That box. It contains their life, their memories.
Their instability.
Their instability, and it forces you, the donor, to ask, what box? Why is it still there? And that question, that is the beginning of the journey. That's the call.
It leaves the gap wide open for the donor to fill with their own feelings about home or stability or the lack of it.
Let's take another one. A completely different cause, say marine conservation. The instinct is to just launch into statistics about plastic in the ocean.
Which closes the gap.
Immediately closes it.
Yeah.
So what does the residue look like there?
I'm not sure.
Well, the residue is the tangible, immediate cost. So instead of the coral reef is dying, you start with something like, there are 3 pieces of ghost netting still tangled around the anchor.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is powerful. Why?
Because it implies an unresolved disaster. Why are there still 3 pieces? What failed? What did they catch? It gives the donor a specific, tangible image, the ghost net, which is the artifact of the catastrophe. It forces them to invest their imagination in the immediate failure, not the sweeping, numbing statistic.
And that really is the definition of a successful call to adventure. It has to be short, emotionally disruptive, and leave that crucial gap for the donor to invest their own heart in the problem.
Yeah. Because if you don't shock them into awareness in those first few words, they will not be ready for step 2.
Which is retreat.
Right. Once a person hears a call that powerful, their first, most human impulse is to go back to their comfortable, ordinary world and pretend they never heard it.
And that leads us perfectly into the topic for our next deep dive. Once we nail the call to adventure, we have to deal with the inevitable human reaction. the refusal of the call. So next time, in part 2, we are going to explore why statistics, even huge, scary statistics, actually kill empathy, and how the real villain of the story is something called psychic numbing. We'll show you how to recognize it and how to overcome it. For more information about this and all Click and Pledge products, make sure to visit clickandpledge.com and request for a one-on-one training or demo, whether you are a client or curious about our platform. Just ask us, and we will gladly get together with you to chat. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast to stay up to date with all the latest and greatest features of the Click and Pledge Fundraising Command Center. We'll see you next time.